The rain came down in sheets, hammering the sleek glass facade of the Sterling Tower in downtown Seattle. It was a fitting backdrop for the chaos that had descended on the Sterling family. Victor Sterling, the real estate magnate whose empire spanned the Pacific Northwest, was dead. A slick highway, a late-night drive, and a catastrophic crash had ended his life at 67. The news broke like a thunderclap across the city, dominating headlines and social media feeds. Victor Sterling, the man who reshaped Seattle's skyline, was gone, leaving behind a fortune estimated at $4 billion, and a family teetering on the edge of collapse. Victor's 4 children gathered in the opulent boardroom of Sterling Enterprises, a penthouse suite overlooking the Puget Sound. The air was thick with tension, the kind that festers in families bound by wealth but divided by ambition. The siblings had barely spoken since their father's death 3 days ago, each processing the loss in their own way, or not at all. James Sterling, the eldest at 38, sat at the head of the mahogany table, his jaw tight and his charcoal suit impeccable. As CEO of Sterling Enterprises' commercial division, he was the heir apparent, a man whose cold pragmatism mirrored his father's. His gray eyes scanned the room, calculating, always calculating. Claire Sterling, 34, lounged in, her chair scrolling through her phone with manicured nails. Her designer dress screamed money, and her social media empire, built on curated glamour and sponsored posts, had made her the family's public face. She barely looked up, her indifference a shield against the grief she refused to acknowledge. Ethan Sterling, the youngest at 24, slouched in his seat, his hoodie and ripped jeans a stark contrast to the room's polished decor. A college dropout and self-proclaimed free spirit, Ethan's life revolved around fast cars, late-night parties, and a revolving door of questionable friends. His bloodshot eyes suggested he hadn't slept, or sobered up, since the funeral. Maya Nguyen, 30, sat apart from the others, her simple blouse and jeans marking her as an outsider in this den of wealth. Adopted by Victor at age 10 after her parents, close friends of his, died in a fire, Maya had never fully integrated into the Sterling family. She ran a small nonprofit dedicated to housing the homeless, a passion that often put her at odds with her father's ruthless business practices. The door opened and Arthur Grayson, Victor's longtime lawyer, entered. His silver hair and tailored suit gave him an air of quiet authority, but his expression was grim. He carried a leather briefcase, its contents the reason for this gathering. The siblings straightened, their eyes locking onto him. This was it, the reading of the will. Grayson cleared his throat, setting the briefcase on the table. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but heavy. "Your father's passing has left a void, not just in your lives, but in this city. His will, however, is unconventional." James leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "Unconventional how?" Grayson opened the briefcase and withdrew a single sheet of paper, handwritten in Victor's distinctive scrawl. "Before I read the formal will, your father left specific instructions. You'll each receive a copy of this letter, but I'll read it aloud first." He adjusted his glasses and began, "My children, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I built Sterling Enterprises from nothing, a kid from Tacoma with a dream and a chip on his shoulder. But that dream came at a cost. The towers I raised, the deals I struck, they displaced families, raised communities, and left scars you've never had to see. I've given you everything, wealth, privilege, power, but I fear I've failed to teach you what matters most, humanity. My fortune is yours, but not without a price. For the next 3 months, each of you will live in the forgotten corners of this city, places my empire touched, places where people struggle because of decisions I made. You'll live as they do, with new identities, no money, no connections. No Sterling name to shield you, you'll have nothing but your wits and each other. If you refuse or if you cheat, you forfeit your inheritance. Survive this, and prove you understand the weight of my legacy. Fail, and it passes to someone else. This is my final lesson. Don't disappoint me. Victor Sterling." The room fell silent, the weight of the words sinking in. Claire laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "Is this a joke? He wants us to, what, play poor?" "It's no joke," Grayson said, his tone firm. Your father was explicit. You'll each be assigned a new identity and a job in one of Seattle's low-income neighborhoods, specifically the South End, where Sterling Enterprises' early projects displaced hundreds of families. You'll live in a boarding house, work, manual jobs, and have no access to your accounts or contacts. I'll provide the details tomorrow. If any of you try to circumvent these terms, hiring proxies, bribing monitors, or leaving the area, you'll be disqualified. Ethan snorted, kicking his feet onto the table. This is insane. I'm not living in some roach-infested dump for 3 months. I'll take my trust fund and bounce. Grayson's eyes narrowed. There is no trust fund, Ethan. Not unless you comply. Your father redirected all liquid assets into a locked trust. You either play by his rules or walk away with nothing. James's voice was low, dangerous. And who's enforcing this? You? A third party, Grayson replied. Your father hired an independent firm to monitor your compliance. They'll report to me weekly. You won't know who they are, but they'll be watching. Maya, silent until now, spoke softly. He wanted us to see what he saw, the people his deals hurt. This isn't just about money, it's about understanding. Claire rolled her eyes. Spare me the saint act, Maya. You're already halfway to a soup kitchen. This is probably your dream vacation. Maya's cheeks flushed, but she held her tongue. James stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Fine, I'll do it, but don't expect me to like it. Ethan shrugged, smirking. Guess I'll slum it for a few weeks. How hard can it be? Claire tossed her hair. I'll play along, but I'm not lifting a finger for manual labor. I'll figure out a way around this. Grayson handed each of them a sealed envelope. Your new identities, addresses, and job assignments. You start tomorrow. Good luck. As they left the boardroom, the rain still pounded outside, a relentless reminder of the storm awaiting them. The south end of Seattle was a world apart from the gleaming high-rises of downtown. Crumbling brick buildings lined narrow streets, their windows boarded or cracked. The air smelled of damp asphalt and fried food from corner diners. This was where Victor Sterling's empire began, bulldozing tenements to make way for luxury condos, displacing families who could no longer afford to stay. Now his children would live among the ghosts of those decisions. James, now Jim Carter, arrived at a dilapidated boarding house on Rainier Avenue. His new identity cast him as a night security guard at a nearby warehouse. The room was a far cry from his penthouse, a sagging mattress, peeling wallpaper, and a single, flickering bulb. He unpacked the duffel bag Grayson provided. Basic clothes, a cheap phone, and $50 in cash. His first instinct was to call his assistant, but the phone had no contacts, no apps, just a number for emergencies. He cursed under his breath. 3 months. He could endure 3 months. Claire, reborn as Clara Evans, stepped into a textile factory in Georgetown, her new job as a seamstress. The hum of sewing machines and the sour smell of sweat overwhelmed her. She'd spent her life in boutiques, not sweatshops. Her co-workers, mostly immigrants, eyed her warily. Claire's first day ended with a shouting match with her supervisor after she botched a batch of garments. I'm not cut out for this, she muttered, already plotting ways to game the system. Ethan, now Eddie Walsh, found himself hauling bricks at a construction site in Beacon Hill. The work was grueling, his hands blistered by noon. His co-workers, hardened by years of labor, mocked his complaints. Ethan spent his first night at the boarding house sneaking vodka from a flask he'd smuggled, dreaming of the moment he could ditch this charade. Maya, under the name Mia Tran, took to her role naturally, assigned to teach literacy classes. At a community center, she connected with the kids instantly. Their stories of parents working double shifts, of evictions and uncertainty, hit her hard. She'd spent years advocating for these communities, but living among them was different. It was raw, real, and humbling. The first week was a crucible. James, used to boardrooms, struggled with the monotony of night shifts. One night, he intervened when a drunk tried to break into the warehouse, earning a grudging nod from his boss. But the long hours left him exhausted, and the faces of the homeless people he passed on his walk home haunted him. He began to notice the boarded-up storefronts, the families sleeping in cars, relics of his father's legacy. Claire's attempts to cheat the system backfired. She paid a co-worker to cover her shifts, but the monitors caught wind, docking her. A week's pay. Furious, she lashed out at her roommates only to find herself alone when one of them, a single mother named Rosa, invited her to a community potluck. Claire declined, but Rosa's kindness lingered, a crack in her carefully curated armor. Ethan's rebellion was bolder. He bribed a co-worker to clock him in while he slept off hangovers in the boarding house. But when a scaffold collapsed, injuring a friend who'd covered for him, Ethan's bravado crumbled. For the first time, he felt the weight of consequence. Maya, meanwhile, uncovered something odd. A janitor at the community center, an old man named Frank, seemed to know too much about her. He dropped cryptic comments about her father, hinting at a past tied to Sterling Enterprises. One night she found a note slipped under her door. "Look closer. The truth is buried." It was the first clue in a trail that would unravel everything. The south end of Seattle was unrelenting, a maze of cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights that tested the Sterling siblings' resolve. 3 weeks into their father's bizarre experiment, the initial shock of their new lives had given way to a grinding reality. The boarding houses they called home were damp and cramped, the air thick with the smell of mildew and desperation. Each sibling faced their own battles, their carefully constructed facades crumbling under the pressure of survival. James, as Jim. Carter had settled into his role as a night security guard, but the job was a far cry from the boardrooms he once commanded. His shifts at the warehouse were long and lonely, the silence broken only by the occasional clatter of a forklift or the distant wail of sirens. He patrolled the perimeter with a flashlight, his mind racing with strategies to outsmart his father's monitors. But the South End had a way of wearing him down. One night he found an elderly man, Harold, rummaging through the warehouse's dumpster for scraps. Harold's weathered face and threadbare coat struck a chord. James recognized him. From the streets near Sterling Enterprises' first condo project, a development that had displaced hundreds. Against his better judgment, James slipped Harold a sandwich from his lunch. The old man's quiet "God bless you" lingered, a crack in James's armor of ambition. Claire, now Clara Evans, was unraveling at the textile factory. The relentless pace of the sewing machines and the supervisor's sharp tongue pushed her to the edge. She'd tried every trick, charming co-workers, faking illness, even offering cash from her dwindling $50 stipend to swap shifts. But the monitors were relentless, docking her pay for every infraction. One evening, Rosa, the single mother from her boarding house, found Claire crying in the communal kitchen, her hands raw from needle pricks. Rosa didn't pry. She just handed Claire a plate of homemade tamales and sat with her in silence. 4. The first time Claire felt the sting of her own isolation, she began to notice the small acts of kindness around her, co-workers sharing lunches, neighbors pooling money for a sick child's medicine. It was a world she'd never known, and it unnerved her. Ethan, under his alias Eddie Walsh, was spiraling. The construction site was a brutal teacher, its physical demands exposing his recklessness. After the scaffold collapse that injured his co-worker, Miguel, Ethan's guilt festered. Miguel, a father of 2, had been covering for Ethan's absence when the accident happened. Ethan visited him in the hospital, expecting anger, but Miguel only gripped his hand and said, "You're young. Learn from this." The words hit harder than any lecture from his father. Ethan stopped drinking, started showing up early, and even helped a struggling co-worker, Luis, finish his quota. But the South End wasn't done with him. Late one night, he stumbled across a group of teens tagging a wall near the site. One of them, a kid named Ty, reminded Ethan of himself. Cocky, lost and desperate for a way out. Against his instincts, Ethan started talking to Ty, offering advice he barely believed himself. Maya, as Mia Tran, thrived in her role at the community center, teaching literacy to kids who reminded her of her own childhood. She'd always been the outsider in the Sterling family, but here she was a lifeline. The children adored her, their eager faces a stark contrast to the apathy she'd faced from her siblings. Yet the cryptic note she'd found, "Look closer, the truth is buried," gnawed at her. She began to notice patterns. The janitor, Frank, lingering too long near her classroom, strange glances from a woman at the corner store, and another. Note, this one tucked inside a library book she used for lessons, reading, "The past is in the walls." Maya confided in one of her students' parents, a quiet mechanic named Jamal, who revealed that Frank had worked for Sterling Enterprises. Decades ago, before a scandal forced him out, the pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was far from complete. By the second month, the siblings' lives collided in unexpected ways. James, patrolling the warehouse, caught Ethan sneaking in after hours, looking for tools to fix a neighbor's broken heater. The brothers faced off in the dim light, their old rivalries flaring. "You're gonna blow this for both of us," James hissed, his voice low. Ethan smirked, but there was no fight in it. "Maybe I'm trying to do something right for once," he shot back. They parted, uneasy, but James couldn't shake the image of Ethan's calloused hands, so different from the spoiled kid he'd known. Claire's world tilted when she overheard a conversation at the factory. Two co-workers whispered about a Sterling project that had torn down their childhood homes years ago. Claire, still stinging from Rosa's kindness, felt a pang of guilt. She started small, helping Rosa's daughter with homework, sharing her meager groceries. But her attempts to skirt the rules caught up with her. A monitor, posing as a factory inspector, confronted her about a scheme to pay a co-worker to falsify her hours. Claire's defiance crumbled. She begged for another chance, promising to play by the rules. The monitor's cold response, "You're father's watching," sent a chill down her spine. Ethan's newfound purpose was tested when Ty, the teen he'd befriended, got caught in a gang dispute. Ethan intervened, pulling Ty away from a fight outside the boarding house, but not before taking a punch to the jaw. The incident shook him, forcing him to confront his own reckless past. He began mentoring Ty, teaching him basic construction skills, but the kid's defiance mirrored Ethan's own, making progress slow and painful. Maya's search for answers led her to a hidden storage room at the community center, where she found a locked box stashed behind old files. Inside were faded documents, blueprints, eviction notices, and a ledger, listing names of families displaced by Sterling Enterprises' first projects. One name stood out, Frank Delaney, the janitor. A note in Victor's handwriting was clipped to the ledger. "Find the heart of the empire." Maya's pulse raced. Was Frank a monitor, a victim, or something else? She confronted him, but he only smiled sadly and said, "Your father was a complicated man. Keep looking." The third month pushed the siblings to their limits. James, exhausted from sleepless nights, began helping Harold, the homeless man, find shelter. He used his security guard connections to get Harold a bed at a local mission, a small act that felt monumental. But a late-night break-in at the warehouse tested his resolve. The intruder, a desperate teenager, pleaded for food, not valuables. James let him go, slipping him $10 from his own pocket. The act broke something in him. Not his ambition, but his certainty that wealth equaled power. Claire, humbled by her failures, threw herself into the factory work. She learned to sew properly, earning grudging respect from her co-workers. One night, she joined Rosa's potluck, bringing a dish she'd learned to make from YouTube tutorials. The laughter and warmth of the gathering stirred memories of her mother, long gone, and Claire realized she'd been chasing approval her whole life. But a new note found in her locker read, "The Empire's shadow is long." It hinted at a deeper truth about her father's dealings, pulling her into Maya's mystery. Ethan's bond with Ty grew, but so did the danger. When Ty's gang troubles escalated, Ethan stepped in, negotiating a tense truce with the leader, a man named Rico. The confrontation nearly turned violent, but Ethan's raw honesty, admitting his own mistakes, diffused it. He returned to the boarding house shaken, realizing he was fighting for more than just his inheritance. Maya's investigation took a dangerous turn. She followed a lead to an abandoned lot once the site of a Sterling project. There she found a hidden cache of letters written by displaced tenants to Victor, pleading for mercy. One letter from a woman named Elena described losing her home and her husband to illness after a Sterling eviction. A final note in Victor's handwriting read, "Their pain is my debt." Maya realized her father's will wasn't just a test, it was an atonement. But before she could process it, she sensed someone watching her. She fled, heart pounding, as the South End shadows seemed to close in. As the 3-month deadline loomed, the siblings began to converge. James and Ethan, after weeks of tension, shared a beer on the boarding house roof. Their first real conversation in years. Ethan admitted his guilt over Miguel. James confessed his growing doubts about their father's empire. Claire, seeking Maya's advice, visited the community center and was stunned by the kids' admiration for Mia. The sisters, never close, found common ground in their shared exhaustion and fear of failing Victor's test. But the mystery deepened. Maya shared her findings with the others, a risky move, but she sensed they were all being watched. The notes, the documents, Frank's cryptic hints, they pointed to a truth Victor wanted them to uncover. A final note found in James's locker read, "The box holds the key. Find it before they do." The siblings agreed to meet at the community center. After hours, determined to crack the puzzle, their meeting was interrupted by a figure in the shadows, Frank, holding a key. "Your father trusted me to guide you," he said, his voice heavy, "but you're not the only ones looking." He handed Maya the key and vanished into the night, leaving the siblings with a locked box and a warning. Time was running out. Community Center was a ghost town at midnight, its fluorescent lights flickering like a dying pulse. The Sterling siblings, James, Claire, Ethan, and Maya, gathered in the basement storage room, the air thick with dust and tension. The locked box sat on a rickety table, its rusted surface a relic of their father's past. Maya clutched the key Frank had given her, her hands trembling. The notes, the documents, the cryptic warnings all led to this moment. But the weight of Frank's final words, "You're not the only ones looking," hung over them like a storm cloud. James, his security guard uniform rumpled from a long shift, broke the silence. "Open it, Maya. Let's end this." Claire, her usual polish replaced by a frayed sweater and tired eyes, nodded. "Whatever's in there, it's what Dad wanted us to find. I'm done running from it." Ethan, sporting a bruise from his run-in with Rico's gang, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Just don't expect it to be a treasure map. Knowing Dad, it's probably another lecture." Maya inserted the key, the lock clicking with a hollow thud. Inside was a collection of items, a worn journal, a stack of yellowed letters, a USB drive, and a small sealed envelope marked, "For my children." She opened the journal first, its pages filled with Victor Sterling's meticulous handwriting. The entries dated back decades, chronicling the rise of Sterling Enterprises and the costs it exacted. March 1987. Closed the deal on Rainier Valley, 300 families displaced. Met Elena Martinez today. She begged me to reconsider. Said her husband's sick, can't afford to move. I told her progress has a price. Her tears haunt me. June 1992. Georgetown project approved. Frank Delaney warned me about cutting corners on tenant relocations. Fired him for insubordination. He was right. I see their faces in my dreams. The siblings read in silence, the weight of their father's guilt sinking in. The letters, many, from displaced tenants like Elena, were raw with pain, families torn apart, livelihoods destroyed, all to fuel Victor's empire. The USB drive contained a video which Maya played on an old laptop from the community center. Victor's face appeared gaunt and weary, recorded weeks before his death. "My children," he said, his voice gravelly but firm, "I built Sterling. Enterprises on ambition but also on suffering. I displaced thousands, justified it as progress. I was wrong. This test wasn't just to humble you, it was to make you see what I ignored for too long. The box holds my confession, my shame. If you're watching this, you've lived among those I hurt. Now you decide. Inherit my empire and repeat my mistakes, or rebuild it into something better. The choice is yours." The sealed envelope contained a single sheet, a draft amendment to Victor's will, redirecting half the estate to a foundation for affordable housing, contingent on the siblings' agreement. If they refused, the entire fortune would go to charity, leaving them nothing. Claire's voice shook. "He's asking us to give up billions." James clenched his fists. "Or to fix what he broke. But who's watching us? Who's they?" As if on cue, the door creaked open. Frank Delaney stood there, his janitor's uniform replaced by a worn suit. Behind him were two men in dark jackets, their faces unreadable. "You found it," Frank said, his voice heavy. "But you're not alone." Frank's presence sent a jolt through the room. Maya stepped forward, clutching the journal. "You worked for our father. You knew about this all along. Who are they?" Frank sighed, his eyes darting to the men behind him. "The monitors, hired by Victor to ensure you followed the rules, but they've got their own agenda." The taller man, his face scarred and stern, spoke. "I'm Carter. We work for a consortium, investors who backed Sterling Enterprises. Your father's little experiment threatens our profits. He was planning to dismantle the company, redirect funds to make amends." "We can't allow that." James stepped in front of his siblings, his voice cold. "So you've been spying on us, rigging the game?" Carter smirked. "We've been ensuring our interests. You've all been impressive in your own way. But if you sign that amendment, the Empire collapses. We'd rather you didn't." Ethan laughed, a bitter edge to it. "You think you can scare us into keeping Dad's dirty money?" Claire, her usual bravado gone, clutched Maya's arm. "What do they want, Maya? What's the play?" Maya's mind raced. The documents, the video, the amendment. It was Victor's attempt to atone, but also a trap for the greedy. She faced Carter, her voice steady. "You can't force us to sign anything. The will's locked. Grayson's the executor." Carter's partner, a wiry man with cold eyes, pulled a gun. "Grayson's been persuaded. Sign the original will. Keep the Empire intact and you walk away rich. Refuse and this gets messy." The siblings froze. James calculated their odds. 2 armed men, no weapons, no way out. Ethan's fists clenched, his newfound resolve battling his fear. Claire's eyes darted to the door, her instinct to run, warring with her guilt. Maya, though, saw the truth. "You're bluffing," she said. "If you kill us, the will defaults to the charity clause. You lose everything." Carter's smirk faltered, but he raised the gun. Before he could act, a crash echoed from upstairs. Footsteps pounded, and Jamal, the mechanic Maya had confided in, burst in with a group of community center volunteers. Rosa, Ty, even Harold. They'd followed Maya, suspicious of her late-night meeting. Jamal tackled Carter, wresting the gun away, while Ty and Rosa subdued the second man. The fight was over in seconds, the monitors disarmed and bound. Frank, shaken, spoke. "I was Victor's conscience years ago. He fired me when I pushed too hard. Before he died, he asked me to watch over you, to guide you to this moment. I didn't expect this." 2 days later, the siblings sat in Grayson's office, the rain-soaked Seattle skyline a gray blur outside. The monitors were in custody. Their consortium exposed as a network of profiteers who'd exploited Victor's empire for decades. Grayson, shaken but resolute, laid out the final will. "Your father's terms were clear," he said, sliding the amendment across the table. "You've all survived the 3 months, but there's a catch. One of you cheated, hiring a proxy to cover shifts." His eyes flicked to Claire, who paled. "You're disqualified, Claire." She nodded, tears welling. I get it. I messed up," Grayson continued. "One of you changed outwardly, but not in heart." He looked at Ethan, who flinched. "Ethan, you've grown, but your recklessness, bribing co-workers, confronting gangs, shows you're not ready." Ethan shrugged, a sad smile on his face. "Fair enough. I'm not cut out for boardrooms anyway." Grayson turned to James and Maya. "You two passed. James, you showed compassion, helping those your father ignored. Maya, you uncovered his truth and united your siblings. But only one can inherit the controlling share. The other must walk away or agree to the amendment. Splitting the estate with the foundation." James and Maya exchanged a glance. James, the ruthless heir, had softened, his nights with Harold and the warehouse's desperate intruders changing him. Maya, the outsider, had proven her strength, her investigation exposing Victor's guilt and the monitor's greed. The choice was impossible. "I'm out," James said suddenly, standing. "I've spent my life chasing power. Dad was right, it's hollow. Maya, you take it. You've always known what matters." Maya shook her head. "No, James, We do this together, or not at all. She pushed the amendment forward. We sign this. Half the estate goes to the foundation. We rebuild Sterling Enterprises, not as a machine for profit, but for people. Grayson raised an eyebrow. You'd give up billions? It's not. Giving up, Maya said. It's paying a debt. James nodded, a rare smile breaking through. Let's do it. 6 months later, the South End was changing. Sterling Enterprises, under James and Maya's leadership, launched a massive affordable housing initiative converting old properties into community-driven complexes. The boarding house where they lived became a hub for job training and childcare named after Elena Martinez, whose letter had haunted Victor. Claire, humbled, joined the foundation, using her social media savvy to raise funds. Ethan, free from the Empire's weight, started a construction apprenticeship program with Ty, giving kids like him a path out of trouble. Maya stood on the roof of the Elena Martinez Center, the Seattle skyline glittering in the distance. The journal, now a relic of her father's redemption, rested in her hands. She didn't know if Victor would be proud or ashamed, but she felt a peace she hadn't known before. The Empire's shadow was long, but its light was growing. James joined her, his tie loosened, a blueprint tucked under his arm. You think Dad knew we'd end up here? Maya smiled. He hoped. That's enough. Below, the South End buzzed with life, families moving into new homes, kids laughing in the community center, a neighborhood reborn. The Sterling's legacy wasn't erased, but it was rewritten, one choice at a time.